Got every real estate agent in town joining this thing right now, eh?
Okay, admit all. Excellent, excellent. More and more. Co-host. Bam. Where's Ryan? Oh, I can't make. Oh, I can also make you co-host. Sick. Nice. Aaron, Ryan, you guys are co-hosts. Moj, so are you. And so is Anna Marto, a co-host. So you guys can also admit participants if we miss them into the group. All right, you're
I'm gonna put this on Instagram real quick.
Yeah, I'm also recording from my phone as well. So we have some clips here, and it shows that your bars are yellow for your connections. Are you having an issue with that? Or are you good?
Can you hear me and see me?
I can hear you and see you. Yeah, just shows that it's not excellent, but
I mean, I'm in my garage, so it's where my office is. So we're just gonna have to deal with it that way.
Love it. Ina is here. Hi, Ina.
Let's wait a couple more minutes. It's only 2
Hey,
minutes.
honey, how are you?
I'm fabulous. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. I'm excited to learn some new info.
There you go. And we've got the market guru over here with us, which is
her name is Mila.
no. No.
Mila and Mila.
Oh, it's Mila and Ara. Ara is the market guru. So
By the way, I love
trying
your emails, your email updates. Very nice, Ara. Thank you so much for those.
Well, thanks for reading them. I'm glad
I
at least
read
one
them,
person
like,
reads them.
from the beginning till the end.
blushing.
Are you a real estate agent as well, or no?
Oh no, I'm just a client.
Wow,
Well,
somebody who's not
I
a
want
real
to be a
estate agent actually
client,
reads my stuff.
client in the making. No, Mila, who am I?
You're a lot of things to me.
Right?
Friend, yes. But yeah, that's
Okay, guys, we'll get started in 1 minute. Okay.
You're showing me my face. My gosh, I'm like
there we
working
go.
in a closet.
There you go. Ara's in a garage. We're perfect.
I'm in a garage, so
I'm actually working too. So
see, here's my garage right here.
I'm actually in the hallway, so it looks terrible. Usually I'm like, I have a nice backdrop, but
got it.
It is what it is.
So I think we have a few more people that I think are going to come in. So we'll just wait like 1 more minute here.
Yeah.
And while I figure out how to do this thing.
While you guys are doing that, can I ask a quick question? In case I have to.
Did you find it?
We think we found it.
Mila?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so should I switch my mortgage to fixed rate now? With all the stuff that's going on with the interest rate?
I think that's a great question for a mortgage broker, and we're gonna have Lee coming on right now.
Oh, Lee's gonna be there. Okay.
He's gonna come on in a second, but also I do think that like it's will really depend. Like, are you getting close to paying more than what the fixed rates are?
No, well, my second mortgage that I took out for equity to do the investment.
Yeah.
So that's variable rate. My primary mortgage is unfixed.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, that's something that you need to discuss with your specific pros and cons with a mortgage broker. The only time that it actually starts to make sense is if you're getting quite close to paying the same or more than the fixed rate. But the fixed rates already have a premium built in where they're basically pricing them at a rate that they don't anticipate the market to get to. So
yeah,
well, that's not 100% true. I mean, if you have a fixed rate of like 4 point whatever right now, that doesn't mean that the banks think that the rates are going to be lower than whatever that is 5 years from now. That's not necessarily an indicator of that. But we'll get into all that stuff later. I mean, there's some of that at play, but there's going to be a bit of a this and then a this with interest rates. So we're just going to talk about this and like what happens here, and then because we all know what happens here when interest rates are at the super affordable, what people call cheap money kind of territory. But what I think a lot of people are really concerned with is like, okay, so we've been down here in cheap money territory for so long. Like, what does the market look like when it's climbing out of that into a more I'm going to use the word into a more normal zone, because that's what it is. Like, a lot of people are saying, oh, interest rates are being hiked, jacked, skyrocket. Like, these are the words that we're hearing out there right now. But like, we're still below pre-COVID levels. The spread
Right.
between fixed and variable is still wider than pre-COVID levels when they were almost the same. So there's just so many things at play right now. And the whole reason we're doing this, I guess we're starting. So hi, we're starting. The whole the whole reason we're doing this is to kind of help you guys cut through some of the noise that if you spend any time on Twitter or anywhere, Twitter is like one of the worst places of humanity, I think. There's people that are just so like horrible on there, just alarmists and chicken littles and the sky is falling. And it's a whole bunch of people that haven't been through these cycles before that are seeing like a slowdown like this for the first time. So, and the whole point of this conversation today is to help you guys understand that, anybody can very easily be successful in real estate investing and just simply owning if you just have long-term vision. And that's what we're really going to focus on today, is kind of remove the drama from the situation, look at the numbers, look at what's happened before, look at where we're at right now, and look at where we are going. So
Cool.
There we have it. Now, let me finally do this Instagram post so we can get some more people in here. And then Mila, maybe you can kind of get going real quick.
Yeah, okay, sounds good. I'm gonna start sharing my screen. Hi, Moj.
Hey, Maj. This is Majgan over here. She's one of the Spring Team agents over here. We got Mila, who's obviously the coordinator of all this as our original Spring Team agent. I think we've got Anna Marto in the house here, Spring Team All-Star. We've got Ryan Wykes, who's my partner, founder of the Spring Team here. We've got, I don't see everybody now that you put share screen on, but let's do this Instagram story while you guys are here. Hi there, we're about to do a webinar with all of these people. So click on this link right here to join right now. We'll be starting in about 35 seconds.
That's it.
You guys just saw me do a live Instagram story. How great does that feel?
Oh, great.
Also, I want you guys to take a moment to appreciate the meme that I made and Samantha remade, because it was a little extreme. But this, in a nutshell, is Ara. Stop the drama. Hilarious. Okay, so here's what's going to happen today and how we're going to go through everything. As always, the same type of a situation as we do with all of our webinars. We leave the Q&A. We have a slide for Q&A at the end if you guys still have any questions, but we like to have questions in the beginning and all throughout. So feel free to either unmute yourself and ask the question, or message in the chat with your questions. We have several co-hosts here who can keep track of all the questions. And basically, here is the recipe for today's webinar. We're going to talk about where we've been. So we're going to cover a few of the previous drops or receptions or corrections in the past, where we are today. And of course, we're going to do the our predictions of where we are going. Okay, so let's get started. Ara wants to say something, but he's muted, so unmute yourself, please.
Not like, I don't like to use the word prediction, because that's just, you might as well just say guess. I think just using all the information that we have to make our best educated sort of have formulated an opinion on what we think is going to happen in the relatively short-term future, because we can never really look too far in advance. But then you can look really far in advance. There's this window that we're just not going to really address at the moment. And also, we're not going to dig in too much into this period, but I just want to talk about it a little bit, because this is when we had a lot of problems in the Toronto real estate market. The inflation was an issue, and just as it is now, unemployment was a massive problem. But this is something that I really wanted to talk about. So, as we went through COVID and COVID started, everybody was focused on the unemployment rate and how it was, how it is such a big problem. But what's really most important to look at is what kinds of jobs were being lost then and what kinds of jobs were affected now. And by now, I don't mean now, but I mean during COVID and what people are concerned about. So back then, these were serious jobs. I remember my father lost his job during this time, changed our entire family dynamic. These weren't transitional kind of like server or service industry kind of positions that were majority of the jobs that were lost during COVID. These were like real, family supporting types of jobs that were really lost during that time. And the US was dug into a really deep recession, which is our major trading partner, creates an issue for Canada overall. And Toronto being one of the major cities. So we saw big price declines almost across the board during that time. And we had interest rates obviously going up to 13 and 14% at that time and even higher before and slightly after. So a few differences between then and now. Number one is our unemployment is number one at a record low now. But if we have other COVID issues, then that usually just affects the lower paying service industry type jobs that don't affect typical home buyers and sellers. So that's a little bit different. We have the US that is, always sort of on the brink of some kind of disaster. But in this case, we don't have the US like in a deep recessionary period. Maybe they're headed that way. And if you've paid any attention to things like yield curves and you understand what that means, and that's not really my forte, so I don't want to confuse you and dig into that with the limited knowledge that I have there. But there is a very different climate there as well right now. So, and interest rates obviously is something that is very important to consider, but the government did learn something from this period of time. At this point, they had never really been through a scenario where they had to deal with this kind of problem. So their only solution at that time was to jack interest rates dramatically, which caused a ripple effect through the market that the federal government does not want to see happen again. So they're going to take a more educated approach to this and perhaps participate in something that's called quantitative easing, which is another thing that I would urge you to look to the actual experts to talk about. And in this case, there are just a number of other ways the government can thread that needle to balance the market versus then. So Toronto today is a very different place. Toronto today is a tech hub, is a financial hub, which it always kind of has been. It's a hub for film in North America next to Vancouver. It's a hub for, tech startups and crypto startups. Like the founder of Ethereum is from Toronto. There's just so much attention on Toronto that, the 1989 Toronto is like almost like a small town compared to where Toronto is today. So the global attention on Toronto at that time was nowhere near where it is now. So the demand side of things is 300 to 400 times where it was during this period. So you have all of these things happening, and you have reduced demand, and you have a local population that was seriously affected by all these job losses. All of these things piled on to create that situation there. So we're not there, okay? I'm not saying, and I should have said this at the beginning. I'm not one of those people that will ever tell you that real estate will just always go up no matter what. Okay, so don't get that confused with the things that I'm saying today. There's no straight line up. If you look in 10, 15, 20-year windows, yeah, there is up. Like there's no, like 20 years from now, real estate today is going to be worth more than real estate is today. And there's going to be bumps and ebbs and flows in the process. So that's that. So hopefully, are there any questions around this time? To look here. What caused the recession in the United States? Thanks for putting me on the spot there.
I just want to know like what this one was a long time ago. I don't know much about this specific one, but this was this caused by the US crisis? What happened there?
No, well, the reason that the US was in a deep recession at that time was one of the contributing factors to why Canada was so affected. Then, because it was, as a major trading partner, like money's not flowing, that's where the majority of the job losses were. And that became a huge problem for us. So overall, like there's a whole bunch of things from like high oil prices to, unemployment to, companies pulling out and starting to move their manufacturing overseas. There's just a lot that happened during that time that is not really in the same kind of boat right now. But, when we're talking about overseas, that kind of talks to the inflation numbers, which we're going to get to later with this sixth wave that we have of COVID in China, which is why I know I'm getting way ahead of myself with that, but let me look up something here for you. So I get the number correct.
Of all the foregoing afterwards, recessions or declines going forward. But this one, I'm just curious what exactly has fueled it. I don't know if anybody else has a question or cares about it.
I mean, without getting too deep into it, like the US recession was essentially caused by the same reason why the Canadian market was affected. It's the government financial policies that resulted in high interest rates and restricted lending. Money just wasn't flowing like it was. So they reacted the same way as Canada did by just jacking rates and making it very hard to access money, which affected the confidence in the market. There were so many other things involved, but generally that's the thing. That's what causes recessions. Money stops flowing, trade stops happening, and your market dips into a recessionary period. Now, how long do those periods last? They used to last quite a bit longer than they do now. Now it just seems like they come in and out of recessions very, very quickly. We did have our mortgage broker Lee Wellbanks join just now, so I don't know if he has anything to say about that yet, but Lee Wellbanks is a great mortgage broker of ours. We have Lee Wellbanks and James Harrison are the two mortgage brokers our team usually works with. So if we have any mortgage rate questions later, we're going to have some experts online to answer those questions. So let's move on from this slide, Mila.
Okay, moving on. 2008. This one was
Yeah,
a big.
so here's another thing. So like whenever you hear somebody saying, well, the Canadian market will inevitably crash because it reminds me of the United States and how prices were increased so quickly. And I'll get, sorry?
Yeah, it's nothing like that.
Well, okay, let me ask you, does anybody, I mean, maybe I won't ask, I'll just tell, okay? This isn't like a team training session, I'll just tell you guys. So the reason why the US market did what it did was because they had extreme predatory lending practices that made it almost impossible for people to afford their mortgages after a certain period of time, number one. Number two, like there were people that were in negative equity positions on the day they took possession of their house, meaning there were these things called 80-20 loans where you borrowed 80% of the value from one bank, 20% from another bank, plus all the fees and the charges on top of that meant you owed like 110 to 115% of the value of the home that you owned, which was already artificially inflated. Homes in communities in the United States were increasing like by 100% to 200% over like a 3 to 6 month period for no reason other than speculation. And that's the big difference between the Toronto market and all of these like fringe markets that have gone through these severe ups and then crashes. Toronto's real estate market is not based just on speculation. People are buying in Toronto because they have extremely high paying jobs here, some of the most diverse communities on the entire planet, which is attracting high paying and skilled workers from all over the world. So nobody was moving to Boise, Idaho in 2007 to take advantage of a $300,000 a year tech job, but that's what's happening here. So, you know, there's a huge difference in the way that market was moving during that time. So 9.5% price drop, that's nothing. There were some communities that had a 95% price drop, like over a matter of a month. People were leaving their keys in the door and walking away from these like horribly built homes. If you hear, yes.
The one thing you're missing there that was happening in the States at that time is they were like, when we have our interest rates, okay, we're still paying above the prime rate. They were paying interest rates below prime rate for a window of a period of time. Okay.
Well, that's what that's what I said at the beginning. That's what I said at the beginning with the predatory lending practices with interest rates.
I know, but you didn't get into you didn't get into the specifics that they were paying a super low rate for a window of time, whether it was 6 months to 1 year, that was affordable.
And then it was
and then their payments were going through the roof a year later. So they could afford the home for the first year they were in the home. And then exactly, they had teaser rates that were adjusted later. So they could afford the home the first year they were in the home. And then their rates would go up to above prime, and they could no longer afford the payment. So they were going from like a $2,000 a month payment to a $5,000 a month payment. And they couldn't afford that $5,000 a month payment. And that's why people were walking away.
True. So
are you in like it's so echoey where you are.
where I am?
No, where Ryan is, I think.
No, his camera just doesn't work. So yeah, so if you want to dig into the details of why those payments weren't sustainable, there you go. So there's nothing. So if you hear of any agent that you're working with that is referencing 2008 and says it's similar to Toronto of today, you should immediately fire that agent because they do not know what they're talking about.
Yeah, they
It
don't
is not based in any sort of reality. They don't understand economics, and they don't understand anything beyond a headline of what was happening at that time. So, this is the goal of today, is to kind of go beyond the headlines and talk about the why of all of this stuff. When you dig into the why, that, have you guys seen that movie, The Big Short? Like,
Yeah.
that's even if you watch that movie, you would have a better understanding of the US market than some people that I see talking about it do. It's, the majority, not majority, there's a big chunk of borrowers that were in default of their mortgage payments. So you could foresee this kind of crash happening, which is what happened in that case. We don't have a majority of Canadians that are in default positions. There are always going to be a group of people that are in default positions, but not enough to affect the market en masse. And remember, I know Toronto, and that's all we're talking about. I don't ever reference the Canadian real estate market because it really is irrelevant to people that live in the markets that we buy and sell in every day. I will never reference the entire 416 because our clients generally aren't in the entire 416 or 905. So it's very important to dig into the numbers where you are interested in buying or selling, because we have micro communities in Toronto that react very differently to economic changes and things like that. So there's no one rule that's, there could be one community that's doing very well. Will another one just a few kilometers in a different direction isn't. And there could be a house in one area that's doing well and a condo in another area that's doing well, but vice versa, not the same story. So it's very, very important to just, understand that these headlines exist and they're there to get you to click and read the articles. But I'd encourage you to read the actual articles and then ask the questions and not just make assumptions that, your dentist would have told you during a tooth cleaning and take that as some sort of fact, which happens all the time. Like Mila and I, we were working on a client, helping them buy a unit in a pre-construction building a couple of weeks ago. They were all excited for it. And then it's like, oh, my uncle says that this is not the right thing to do at this time. It's like, well, was your uncle ever invested in real estate? No. Well, like why, is that advice that's being taken? So anyway, just keep that in mind. Like, we are in real estate and we do benefit from our clients buying and selling, true, but we're not interested in just getting that one sale and then never talking to you again. Like, we want you to make smart decisions, which is why we're taking the time to do this sort of thing. We have a question here in the chat.
Make it a rule to never take advice from people who have less real estate than you or who have bought 1,000 years ago and never again.
I mean, that's always my rule, right? It's always like, if I'm going to invest in pre-construction condos, I want to talk to people that have successfully done that. If I want to invest in becoming a developer, I want to talk to other developers and nobody else. You know what I mean? Everybody has their lane and everybody, likes to either stay in it or meddle in the other ones. I might meddle from time to time, but I prefer to stay in the lane that I know. So let's move on from this, unless there are any questions.
Yeah, before we move on, I just want to make sure everybody understands, and we have this on record, that what the difference was in 2008 USA and even in 2008, let's say Toronto market was very different. Their lending practices were different than ours, which is why we saw a drop, but because of USA and their recession, but our drop was significantly less than theirs, of course, because we already back then had better lending practices. We were more diligent with giving out those mortgages to people. So and then later on, we'll talk about the stress test and whatnot. So everybody.
But also remember that this is a time that you could still do like pretty close to zero down mortgages, right? I mean, Lee, you can correct me there if I'm wrong, but I remember when my career first started around 2007, 5% down was definitely a thing, but I think we could even do less than that at the time. No? Yeah. Lee is nodding yes.
Yeah, sorry. It was. We had a short period of time there. We had no money down and 40-year mortgages for high ratio. It was crazy. Absolutely insane.
So even with that kind of lending, our urban markets, Toronto's like core and surrounding communities really had a small pullback. That was nothing all that serious. It was just people scared and uncertain as to what was happening. So, but then again, as we saw, we had that big run up to 2017 with some blips in between. So we can move on from this.
Yeah. So I just quickly, I know you didn't want me to do this, but I wanted to show this to people. To those of you who are into charts, I've pulled up two charts from the Toronto Real Estate Board data, and this is all of the GTA showing us what happened in 2008 and how we kind of were at our peak, and then we dipped down by February 2009. We hit the bottom, and we recovered in the GTA all in all for all types of transactions, houses, condos, townhouses, all of it. We've recovered by June 2009. We were back at the same high that we were before the drop started happening. And then if you look at the very, very urban community, so I picked Toronto C1, which is a super urban community, you can see that that whole dip was a lot quicker, right? So we started going down in October, bottomed out in February, and came back up right here. So it was just a smaller.
Can you go back? Can you go back to that for a second, Mila? Can you go back there? So, and this is, I'm actually glad you did include them after all, because another thing that happens, you can't see my mouse, can you?
No.
I guess not.
You want me to tell me where?
No, well, it doesn't matter. That would be kind of, I don't need to direct you where you're, just let that person in that just joined, and then I'll talk about the map.
Yeah.
So what happens during that time where we had that, quick recovery is normally if a market is not built on any sort of strong foundations, and if you have borrowers that are in really terrible equity positions, meaning they owe more than their property is worth, or they're just, are in financial trouble, they will sell their house and put it on the market and just take whatever they can get so they can move on, or the bank will do it if they're in default and by foreclosure or power of sale. Which is not really as much of a thing here in Canada as it is in the US. But see, you'll notice that in 2008, when prices started coming down, there was just a slight dip here. And if we had a market full of over leveraged, meaning you're not in a good financial position and you needed to sell, we don't have panic sellers. If we had panic sellers that needed to sell, like emergency fire sale type things, there would have been a much steeper drop there deep into 2009 and maybe into 2010, because the market would have been flooded with listings. And this is around the time that I was kind of getting my career going. I was about a year into my career at this time, and I remember looking with buyers for things, and there was absolutely nothing on the market for me to show them. So
during this time right here?
Yeah, no, before that. So
right
during the dip, and when it just started to curve up just before February 2009, like there was nothing on the market. But the buyer demand was also really weak because the buyers were still kind of scared. So there were no major price jumps. But once buyers started to get more comfortable, then February, March, spring came along, buying started happening, sellers started seeing prices normalize again, and they started coming to market. But then by that time, the buyer demand was increasing so much, they were scooping up anything that came to market. So in Toronto specifically, the way we have previously reacted to any sort of economic uncertainty has been putting on the brakes. It's been sellers who aren't getting the prices that they hoped for coming off the market. And not dropping price to fire sale. You know what I'm saying? So every time in the past when there has been an unprecedented event, it has resulted in Torontonians, specifically urban Torontonians, not flooding the market with their properties. And that's a very important distinction between our Toronto market and a lot of other markets that are not built on such a strong foundation of employment, entertainment, sports, energy. Like all that stuff matters that you can't really put into a graph. So, and then, buying happens, and we all saw what happened after that. So we can move into any questions about all this before we move on to 2017?
Yeah, if anybody has questions, but I just want to reiterate to people on here who are potentially in the market or are kind of teeter-tottering, we are not in the urban Toronto markets. We're not panic sellers. We don't see, like with our own clients who are sellers, we see them just say, hey, I can't get the number that I want, so I'm just going to wait. And they're able to wait. And there's a lot of, I have conversations with people who are not entering the market because they think that people are over leveraged and they're going to not be able to pay for their mortgages and going to have to fire sell. And it's a conversation that I have over and over again with people saying that just doesn't happen. We've seen it. If a global pandemic didn't make people do that, and we're going to get to the global pandemic, we can't imagine it happening.
Well, that's actually important that you mentioned the pandemic, because if I'm a person who's been watching the market, I'd be like, well, what are you talking about? Prices did drop during the pandemic. And I want to address that real quick. So after this, are we getting into that, Mila? Is there a slide?
Yeah, we are. The pandemic is right here. The pandemic.
Okay, go back. Okay, go back.
Go back. So we're going to cover the pandemic in just a second. So now we're here in 2017, which in some ways reflects some of the things that we're experiencing today, and what they are is the government intervention. So there's a couple of things that happened over here in 2017 that affected the market. that we're also seeing today. So number one was we introduced the foreign buyer tax, and it first happened in Vancouver, and we knew that it was coming to Toronto as well. And so a lot of the Vancouverite investors or foreign investors that were investing in Vancouver started flooding to Toronto. So you'll see on the graphs later that we had a big hike in prices because of that before we passed this rule here. So from 0%, we went to 15%. Just to guys give you a perspective, today we've increased that 15% to 20%. So just have like reflect back and try to understand which one has a bigger shock value, from 0 to 15%, from no foreign tax to dishing out 15%, or for 15 to 20. Right? We're already used to this type of a thing. So it's just an increase. And ultimately, we also had the mortgage stress
Except
test.
there's a proposed ban this time.
And there's
for
a
two-
proposed ban. Yeah, there's a proposed ban.
But we'll talk about that more because there's exemptions there.
Well,
But
that's
also,
yeah. Ara will cover that as well. And the mortgage stress test was introduced, which is an amazing measure. But what it did was it priced out people. So for those of you guys who don't know what a stress test is, it's basically you're not getting approved at today's rate, you're getting approved at a rate that is higher so that you're able to withstand the fluctuations of the Bank of Canada rate increases, which then just allows you to be in a safer position. But what it did is it priced out a lot of entry-level buyers out of the market. So again, that introduction of the stress test has created a little bit of a panic with the buyers who wanted to get into the market, which of course put upward pressure on the prices. Ara, do you want to talk a little bit about what the thing is today with the foreign buyer ban?
Yeah, sure. We can talk about that, but I want to talk about 2017 some more because there are markets that were really affected during this time. That a lot of people, again, are drawing a comparison to 2017 and today and saying that the suburban markets are really going to take a huge hit during this cycle of new measures. Just go back to that real quick. Is there a graph after this that addresses the suburban stuff?
So this is for GTA, and then I've got the urban,
okay.
And this is all.
Okay, so I just want to quickly talk about what happened in the suburban markets, then we can move on to the other things. So like in 2017, like communities like, in Richmond Hill and Markham and beyond, like all those, not really accessible by transit, but now they are, I guess. But all these communities took a huge hit during that time because there's a lot of speculative buying happening in those communities. There's a lot of foreign buying happening in those communities, not like foreign investors, random people, but there were people that were, maybe moving here in the process of moving here that might have been affected. But there were a lot of exemptions that were in place to that foreign buyer tax at that time. So it didn't affect a ton of people. But the main problem was all the speculative buying that was happening. Somebody would buy a property today, and then a week later, they'd flip it for X amount of money. There's just a lot of that noise happening. Today, a lot of people have bought in those communities.
It's insane that people were able to flip in a week.
It was like a week, a month, whatever. They were buying properties, not closing on them and then flipping them. It was just price gains were unbelievable. And they were not based on any sort of fundamental, reason. It was just for the sake of increasing the price and, hot potatoing the thing until somebody held the bag at the end of the day. Today, a lot of people made those moves to those communities for, lifestyle reasons. There are a lot of companies that are truly not going to go back to their downtown offices. And so a lot of people are in these homes, they're not speculators, they're homeowners. They're people that are there, they've now put their roots there. So it's a different type of buyer there. So again, when you have a foreign buyer tax today, like Mila said, the 5% increase is not a major issue for people. But there will the 2-year proposed ban on foreign buying does exempt international students that are coming here to go to school. It exempts foreign nationals that are coming here on work visas, but those people were previously also exempt from the foreign buyer tax. They are no longer exempt from the foreign buyer tax. Those people now, even though they're not affected by the ban, those people go from 0 to 20 on a foreign buyer tax. So that is a consideration there. But the suburbs, I think, are a lot stronger this time around than they were in 2017. It's the communities further out from the suburbs that might see more of an effect during this round of pullback, but those aren't really our specialized areas, so we can't dig too much into them. So kind of call them like the burgs, like the Kleinburgs or the Stouffville area that's just a little bit further out, or the Grimsbys or those kinds of communities that currently are being affected a lot more than anything else.
So yeah, just
So what are we
perspective.
looking at here, Mila?
Yeah, I just want to cover that real quick. So the areas that people went into because they were priced out of everywhere else, including the suburbs, because the suburbs in 2008 are a very different suburb of 2017 and on to even today. So people that got priced out of the suburbs because they're also very expensive and went into the outside of the suburbs. Now, a lot of those people are either coming back to the offices, and we're not seeing, because life is resuming now, we're not seeing people actively going to those communities anymore. So the local market is coming back to those areas, meaning that the locals are not looking to pay the prices that the Torontonians paid there, which is why we see that those are the areas that might get the biggest hit versus some of the other stuff. So over here, what I'm showing is all of the GTA, including the suburbs, and how here is where all these speculative buying was happening. And then, of course, finally, when these things got announced, it went down and they saw a bigger hit, and it took them longer to recover. But when you're looking at the exact same time frame for the urban Toronto communities, and again, I just picked the CO1. I could have picked all of the Cs, but it would be just too many lines on the screen. You can see here that the dip was minuscule, and we've recovered not in multiple years like the rest of the communities did, but we recovered in a matter of months. Like this is our top here with the speculation or those price hikes. Here's that dip, and here we are back to where we were before the announcements. So the urban communities really didn't feel it the same way that the suburban communities did when we did that the last time around. Anything else you want to cover here on about the 2017?
No, that was really good, and we don't have this in this presentation at all. But if you you can go back to the graph or not, it doesn't matter. But if you are an investor here, and not like somebody looking for their home, if you're an investor, a lot of people will be like, why would you invest in Toronto? There's no cash flow. So cash flow means after all your expenses, your tenant in your unit is a surplus. You're putting money in your pocket, and some investors look for only that. But cash flowing properties, if you want to be in Toronto, you have to have at least 4, 5, 6 units. So you're talking millions of dollars to get into that kind of product in Toronto. You can get cash flowing properties in those more volatile communities, like the rural areas or deeper into the suburbs. You can access properties for cheaper that have more units, and you can cash flow every month. But you're also more susceptible to economic ups and downs. I prefer a much safer path, an investment path, meaning I would rather buy in Toronto, pay more for the property, not really be putting money in my pocket every single month, but have the peace of mind that when I retire, I'm going to have a property that is, most likely worth more than it was the day I bought it. And during that entire time, I've had a tenant pay down the equity for me. I love that safety. I think it's a great vehicle for me. Some people are okay with the volatility, but I love the safety of it. So it's not always about cash flow. And Toronto has proven over and over and over again to provide that safety. But it depends on what your risk tolerance is. So that's a different webinar, I guess.
There we go. Exactly. The volatility in the other markets is very different than it is in Toronto. Okay, so now we're coming to more recent events. Hello, COVID, and the COVID days. Ari, you want to talk about COVID?
I'm sick of talking about COVID, but yes, I'll talk about COVID. So what happens is this virus infects. No, never mind. So so we all know what happened. March 2020, the entire world changed and everybody was scared. Nobody knew what was happening in the markets. The government's trying to find ways to keep people from completely going bankrupt, keep businesses doors open. There's just all these things were happening during that time. Scared. Everybody was talking about the unemployment rate. And at the beginning, it was dramatic and traumatic because there were no measures in place at the very beginning to help companies retain employees, which rolled out later. But a lot of the unemployment, like we said at the very beginning, was lower paying service industry type jobs, bartenders, servers, like that kind of stuff. And then when the federal government finally rolled out a plan with the wage subsidy to help people keep their employees, to keep the lights on in these businesses, to help with rents, which was another issue altogether because it required both landlord and tenant cooperation versus the residential market, which was very different. But on the commercial side that affected companies was very, very different then. So unemployment was a huge issue. I think we even crossed the threshold of like 10% at that time, which we hadn't seen since the late 80s. But we can get to that later. And then so each thing on this thing is like another talking point that you probably read a headline of and were worried about, like the mortgage deferral cliff. So there was a program that was engaged to all the lenders where you were allowed to, and maybe Lee can correct me, I don't think it was all the lenders, but maybe it was just the A lenders, Lee, is that?
A lot of the B lenders still offered some. They might have scrutinized it a bit more, didn't give away the full 6 months easily, but most lenders were somewhat accommodating to it.
So Lee, rather than me kind of potentially make mistakes talking about the deferral program, I can, kind of lead into it. You can kind of fill in the detailed blanks, but essentially, in case you're not familiar with what deferrals were, if you were allowed to defer, meaning put off your mortgage payments for up to 6 months, and then at the end of that 6 months, the mortgage payment amounts would have just been added to the amount owing on your mortgage, and then your payments would resume. Is that correct, Lee?
That's the general idea, yes.
Okay, cool. So I just didn't want to get that part wrong. So but the mortgage deferral cliff was a big talking point at the time. It's like, oh, once people have to start their payments again, they're going to have to pay all the ones that they didn't pay for 6 months, and then they're going to have to pay the new payments. And so people thought everybody was going to default on their mortgages, but nobody seemed to understand that you didn't have to catch up on those 6 months of payments. This was just added onto your mortgage, which maybe added like $10 to your monthly mortgage payment overall. So this cliff that everybody was concerned about was really not as big a deal. And number one, it didn't have enough people on the program to really affect the market overall. And of the group of people that were, of the percentage of the population that was taking advantage of this 6 month deferral, even if you had a percentage of those people not be able to continue their obligations to the bank, there wouldn't be enough of them to flood the market with these properties that were being defaulted on to affect the market in general. Because like we said, employment generally of the typical homeowner, home buyer demographic, their employment was generally not affected at a level it needed to be for them to have mortgage payments become an issue. In fact, during that time, most homeowners weren't going on vacations. They weren't going to Costco and spending $800 every weekend. They weren't going to Canada's Wonderland and spending $1,000 for your 6-year-old to throw up their funnel cake they just ate. Like these things weren't happening. Clothes weren't being bought, except Amazon purchases were going through the roof. But disposable income also went through the roof during this time. So people had money, which is why there were, contractors couldn't keep up with the demand for the renovation requirements for people's homes. People started working from home and like, oh my God, I need to renovate this to make an office. Like all this economic activity started happening, which actually started stimulating the economy versus the exact opposite, which a lot of market bears were thinking was going to happen.
Can I just take a moment here to point everybody's attention to the fact that throughout any time in history of any of the points that we've covered, there have always been very strong bearish sentiment and people talking about an apocalypse happening at some point in the future really, really soon. So this mortgage deferral cliff is a really good example. If you guys Google mortgage deferral cliff, you'll see a bunch of articles of people basically predicting that at the moment that they close this mortgage deferral program, the market's going to go to shit. Everybody's going to start fire selling their properties and the market's going to go down and you're going to be able to finally buy and afford a property. And these things never happen. So to just again bring it back to what's happening today, we're always seeing headlines that are very pessimistic. And the whole point of this webinar is to give you guys more context so that you don't get bogged down in the drama and this like craziness of everything that people are saying and just like look down at the fundamentals and the facts of what's happening. Continue.
Yeah. Thank you. During COVID, there was a massive effect on condo prices in some, and I wouldn't say all buildings, but there was a lot of issues with some buildings. But during COVID, if you look at the Airbnb, go back.
Yeah, actually, so I wanted to show this because this is the urban market where all the Airbnbs were happening. So you can see how COVID affected the market here. But in all of the GTA, it did nothing.
Yeah, so that's the one time that the urban markets were really more affected than a lot of other areas, where at the same time COVID was wreaking havoc on our city, the city of Toronto decided that it would be a really good idea to ban or put heavy restrictions on Airbnbs And I mean, listen, people weren't traveling the world and Airbnbs weren't that used, but you know, a lot of people that had owned condos specifically to Airbnb them in the buildings that allowed them were massively affected by this because their income went to zero all of a sudden. And the potential for future income also went to zero because the city of Toronto said you can only Airbnb your primary residence for up to 6 months a year. And that's it. And you had to pay the, you know, this hotel tax and all this other stuff and register it, et cetera. So it made these people that were running strong Airbnb businesses through the various condos that allowed them in the city, those things actually went to market. Those units actually got fire sold in some cases. So there was like a small window, and we talked about it a lot at this time. Like we were trying to just reach out to every buyer we could. It's like condos are on sale right now. You need to be buying these condos right now. But again, this is the mentality of a lot of people that are now not buying because they feel there's a bottom, like a big bottom coming. When there is a bottom, like there was in September to December of 2020, do you think you have the same mindset of today then? Do you think you feel that you are somehow shielded from all this economic turmoil, that you are going to be confident enough to buy when you think the entire city is burning down? Like it was very difficult to help people understand that these were good buying opportunities because they felt the bottom was just going to just keep going. And that's the big mistake a lot of people make, that are trying to like wait for that bottom. And if you've been a part of our blog for any period of time, you would know that I say you can't day trade real estate. Even if you bought at the peak of every single market cycle over the past 50 years, you would still be ahead today. So it's one of those things that like, it's always like, you can't, the real estate doesn't react like companies trading on the TSX. If you find out the CEO had an affair with somebody and was fudging numbers on their, you know, last profit revenue report or whatever it is, that's going to tank a stock the next day. Real estate doesn't react that way. We're talking about people's homes. So you can't time the market. If you are able to buy today and you need a home, buy that home today. You're going to be better off in the long term than if you didn't.
Like, yeah, so the people who bought right here, you guys, do you think they're sad? Because look where the market is. They don't care. This
isn't like a now thing. This isn't like a unique thing of, oh, this just happened now because we had a big price now and it's not going to happen again. We can take this splice of graph over a 3-year period and apply it to various other times in the past that have seen similar movements. So this isn't just like a now thing. It's not like, oh, once in a generation it's happened, I guess my kids can take advantage of the next one. It's not like that. So anyway, let's move on from this one. So I just wanted to highlight that Airbnb thing, because if that Airbnb thing didn't happen at this time, I suspect that this line would have been a little bit flatter.
Like, look, this
or straighter.
Like you can see nothing, like overall in all of the GTA, it was pretty much, and in fact, just kind of went flat a little bit, and not flat because the price went flat, but flat because people weren't selling. Like the market halted and then resumed again, and people were just still buying.
Like, check this out. Look at this right here. Go back to that for a second.
Yeah.
March to June 2020, people thought the world was literally ending. Look what happened to our real estate prices right here.
Nothing.
You know what I mean? So like that is a pretty, if that doesn't tell you how strong our Toronto and surrounding area market and buyer sentiment and just resident sentiment is overall, I don't know what else can. Like that's a pretty telltale sign of a really strong city right there. That flat line during a time when the entire world was freaking out.
And I was here, like literally out in the market from December to January, in January, like January 6th, January 10th, 15th, when the market started turning overnight, and all these properties that were sitting from this point here, somewhere from November, were 60 days on the market. And all of a sudden they're going over the weekend in multiple offers and selling. And I was with my buyers and I was like, uh-oh. And then it just went up and up and up from there. So we've lived through it. We've seen it. Let's talk about the present. Finally, we get to what's happening.
Yeah, sorry, that was like 50 minutes of stuff that doesn't matter anymore. But it's good to have that that was good to have that context. We can understand kind of where we are right now. So, okay, so let's talk about inflation. That's a pretty big deal. That's something that is. Listen, in like months ago, I was a strong believer that inflation was transitory. It was a temporary kind of thing as supply chains restored themselves, and it very well could have been if we didn't have this giant raging conflict. I don't even want to call it a conflict. this massive criminal activity by Russia in the Ukraine. That is creating a massive problem for oil prices, which is prolonging this inflationary period, which probably would have come to a relatively quicker close if that wasn't happening, which causing oil prices to go through the roof and creating more uncertainty in the world. But another thing that's going to continue to contribute to inflation a little bit longer than I had originally thought is the sixth wave of COVID, which is causing massive lockdowns in China right now, which is going to further affect, things like chip production for cars. So it's going to increase the price of a lot of things that are already very expensive and continue to. So this inflationary period that we have now is lasting a lot longer than most people predicted, only because nobody anticipated Russia, Ukraine. Nobody anticipated sixth wave locking down China again. So again, I feel like there is an end to it. It's just further out than we initially thought. So as inflation comes up, it is going to pull interest rates up with it. That's just kind of what happens. But there also will be a time when that has to calm down just to normalize the economy a little bit. So we're talking a lot of temporary things. And if we look at interest rates today, with the increase on April 13th, which is the first time in like over 20 years, I think, and Lee can correct me if I'm wrong, first time in over 20 years that we've had an increase that was 0.5%, not just 0.25%. So it was a pretty significant increase that did actually scare a lot of buyers. And it did take some buyers out of the market into that wait and see mode. That did happen 100%. But at the end of the day, where we sit today is still 0.75% lower in terms of the Bank of Canada rate than it was pre-COVID. And another important thing to consider that Lee and I were talking about earlier, and you can go on more about this if you wanted, was the gap between variable rates and fixed rates was virtually non-existent prior to COVID. And that, go on, you want to talk about that more, Lee?
Sure. Yeah, I was just going to say, like, literally just before COVID, the fixed rates and the variable rates were almost the exact same. There was no spread in those rates at all. And it's rare in my 28 years of history. I don't think I've ever seen that, where the gap has been that narrow between those two. Variable rates have always been a darling, and this just kind of lost their appeal at that point. And then COVID kicked in and kicked the crap out of the variable rates, and they just fell through the floor, making it cheap money, which is of course what we're seeing today.
Yeah, and that's the thing I want you guys to put into context, is that money today is still relatively inexpensive. Even though we have, 2022 has 5 more rate announcements, and rate announcements don't always equal increases. You have to look at what's happening in the economy. Can the economy handle another big increase? So it's not like we're going to have 5 more 0.5% increases this year. So please don't get confused with that. There's just announcements that are going to perhaps increase them, 0.25% or maybe one other 0.5%. I don't know. There are the rates at the end of 2022 are probably going to be higher than they are right now. Are they going to get beyond where the current fixed rate sits at 4.75 with most banks? Lee, where are we at with fixed rates right now? You're muted, I think.
Sorry, we're seeing a lot of 5-year money sitting in the low 4s right now. So
low 4s. So fixed rates should probably climb up beyond 5% by the end of the year. Is that safe to say?
There's a good chance that we'll get closer to 5%. Again, making the variable rates more attractive, and speaking to Chris's point, normally they make that announcement to change the stress test once per year. It's every December, and they of course just rubber stamp the existing one. But we're seeing a split right now. So right now, variable rates are still qualifying under these lower stress test rates, but fixed rates are being qualified higher. And that's something I expect the government's not happy about, that it's inadvertently pushing more people in the variable rates, which they would deem to be a riskier option. Because they can qualify for more. That's what the stress test is designed to get rid of, is that kind of get that split to disappear. Sorry, I apologize. I've got my kid in the background talking to his TV. So hopefully, we'll likely see that adjustment happening soon. I'd be very surprised it goes much longer without the Bank of Canada stepping in and saying we're going to adjust the stress test rate up, which will, again, start to shrink purchasing power for everybody.
So right now the stress test sits at 5.25%, correct?
Correct.
So just in case people are unclear of what that means, if you go to Lee and he approves you for a mortgage, he's like, hey, congratulations, you can get a 2.2% variable rate, 5-year variable rate. You still have to qualify based on you getting a 5.25% rate. And what you're saying, Lee, is that the Bank of Canada the federal government is considering moving the stress test up as the fixed rate increases, correct?
Correct. Because the alternative qualification is it's your contract rate, so the rate you actually pay plus 2%, whichever one works out to be higher. So right now, with rates being in the 4s, the fixed rates are being qualified at 6%, but variable rates are being qualified still at 5.25. So there's a little bit of an opportunity there for someone wanting to get more bang for your buck to go with the variable rate mortgage.
Oh, interesting. So yeah, because right now, if you opt for a fixed rate right now, you're going to be qualifying at 6%, like you said. Okay.
Yes. So it's going to eat into purchasing power for you.
Got it. What is Mila asking here?
I'm just saying Ryan has told us this really awesome point, and I don't know if he's still in the house to talk about this, but about how like it's not in the government's interest to tank the economy. And every time they do an interest rate hike, they are taking money out of other sectors of the economy to bring that money into.
Well, that's that quantitative easing that we were talking about earlier, whether they're buying back bonds or selling, like providing liquidity into the market and stuff like that. That is, I don't know if Ryan wants to speak to that some more, but there are some very, very smart economists that can probably speak to that at a higher level. But Ryan, do you want to jump in? Can you?
I mean, I just keep it simple to the fact that if you just look at things, and as affordability goes down and interest rates go up and people on variable rates or locking into fixed rates have higher mortgage payments, do you really think their primary residence, the roof over their head, is the first thing they're going to sell?
Right. So we're talking
the
about
easy answer is no.
How consumers are going to react. Yeah. So that's
right.
I
So people stop buying other stuff first. They stop going out for dinner. They stop going on vacations. The used Rolex market that's doubled in the last year, or the used Porsche market, or whatever it be, the cottage market, the secondary home market, all of that discretionary spending will stop before people start fire sailing their home. Now, the flip side of that is, as all of that spending stops, what happens to the economy? The economy slows down, right?
Yeah.
So the government doesn't want to force us into a recession and bring the economy to a halt. So they want to raise interest rates to try and quell inflation, right? They want to quell inflation, but they can only do it to a point. As you said earlier in this presentation, they're not just going to jack rates up to 10, 12, 14%, because they've seen what happens when they do that. And they know that now. And they know spending stops elsewhere before people fire sale their homes. And I think a lot of people who say, oh, the market's going to crash, people can't afford a $500 a month increase in their mortgage or a $200 a month increase in their mortgage. Well, there's lots of other places they're going to stop spending money before they fire sale their home. Exactly. I know there's lots. So, people need to remember that, and people need to think about that. Like, this hyperinflation has been caused, and the inflation is so big, not only because of supply chain issues, but people are also cash rich right now. People took 2 years off of spending. Okay. People stopped traveling for 2 years internationally, right? People stopped eating out at restaurants, going to bars, going to movies, going to shows. They didn't care about their clothes as much because they were on Zoom with the same, button up top and their underwear on, right? So spending stopped and people were saving a lot of money. And so things they could still buy went through the roof. And now it's with, supply chain issues and so on and so forth, other things are also getting more and more expensive. But people had more money to spend. They will pull back, but their primary residence in the city they live in is the last place. Yes, some people that are pundits of the great crash, I agree with you. There are people who are investors in Toronto that may look to sell that investment property in Toronto. But, you know, Lee, do you know what percentage of the market is investor bought versus primary residence?
I've been hearing numbers around a third now, or anywhere from a quarter to a third of purchases nowadays are done by investors.
Those numbers are actually, I was looked into that pretty deeply. And those numbers, yes, if you look at it, like how many people own more than one property, it was like 25 to 30%. But that also is cottage properties, or, you know, a property a condo they might own for their kids. You know, so it's not necessarily like purely investor owned 30% of the market, but it also includes like recreational properties and things like that. So
Right.
anybody
So
that owns more than one place.
Which are outside of Toronto. And those properties are likely to get sold. So the cottage that someone bought that was loved to travel before COVID, that cottage is going to get sold before they fire sale their primary residence for 30% less than it was worth last year. And that's
which is why we're saying those markets will be getting affected more than
which they will. But yeah, people are going to sell their boats. People are going to stop ordering Uber Eats every night. People are going to stop going out. People are going to stop buying clothes and luxury items before they sell their homes. And that's the big point that people don't look at. Okay, they look at like affordability. People can't afford a $300 a month increase in their mortgage with their current lifestyle. If they make lifestyle changes, they can afford it.
That's it.
I'm done.
Yep. And that's super important to consider, which is why every time we looked at those previous graphs during those times of economic turmoil, we had a flat line, or maybe just a small dip. So this goes back to the conversation of like, listen, if you buy real estate today, there's a very good chance that it could be worth a little bit less tomorrow. But we're not looking at tomorrow. We're looking at 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years from now, where all those little bumps would have been smoothed out for you. So, you know, when COVID started, my thing was just like, you know, I would have Instagram stories going out like, hold, like don't sell your properties.
That's what we've been telling people from day one. Don't sell your property if you don't have to, like refinance if you need to. But Anna had a question for Lee. Is it possible the variable and fixed rates will go back to having a narrow spread between the two, like pre-COVID? What do you think, Lee?
Yeah, I would expect that the gap is going to shrink at some point. I mean, we don't normally have rate spreads this large. I mean, normally I'd say it's anywhere from 0.75 to 1% is kind of an average from what I've seen in the past. But the market is still highly volatile. And the way I would interpret this is that we have this spread because we got some catch up to do. And eventually we will. The market, that's why fixed rates are so much higher. The market, which drives fixed rates, are saying we need higher rates. We're just waiting for the Bank of Canada to catch up to that. And they're the ones that determine the variable rates. So it's going to shrink at some point. But that's the reason why right now I'd say you're definitely better off going variable more than ever. There's good opportunity with variable rates for a number of reasons. And the trick is to make sure you go with the lender to alleviate the concerns that, say, Ryan was speaking about. Most major lenders don't change the variable rate payments when rates rise. Your proportion of principal and interest is going to change. So what might have been a 25-year mortgage to start may end up being a 27-year mortgage if you weren't adjusting your payments. But the proper strategy you should be using with any variable rate on an owner-occupied home, it's different on a rental, is you make a payment as if you took the 5-year fixed rate. And that buffer or gap, that savings you enjoy, will be used to prepay the mortgage and offset those future increases for you. That being said, when the rates do catch up, maybe a year down the road, that just means you stop saving money in your mortgage. You were effectively prepaying it up to that point in time. To reverse out all that savings you've just enjoyed, it also means that rates have to go up another 5 or 6 more times. So you really need double the number of increases, so 10 to 12, to be on the wrong side of a variable rate. So it just lends itself to being a better opportunity with much smaller penalties to reverse them. If life happens and you need to get out of that mortgage, the penalty on a variable rate is only 3 months interest, a few $1,000s. But a fixed rate could be 4% or more of whatever you owe, depending on the timing of your break. And you can do the math. I mean, $1 million mortgage, you're talking about tens of thousands of dollars in penalties versus a few $1,000s. Huge difference.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that's, I'm glad you brought that up, because, you know, a lot of people assume that as rates go up, your payment also goes up if you're on a variable. And generally, if you're a borrower from a major A lender, I think it's just Scotiabank that doesn't fix, right? Lee, is that what it is?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
So
like,
that's the one to watch for.
So if you have a variable at any of the major, you know, TD, CIBC, all the big banks, and some B lenders as well, they're not going to be increasing their payment unless that payment doesn't even cover the interest portion, at which point they would have to. But that's a deeper discussion we can have separately if you have any questions. So I don't know if there's much else to really go through here. I mean, the foreign buyer tax we already talked about, increased by 5%. Our unemployment is incredibly low, and we have more employment opportunities coming. Like there's, you know, Google has doubled down on their space here with 500,000 square feet, even during COVID. Netflix is starting their thing here, their headquarters here. We've got the GM Innovation Lab that's about to start going again on the lakeshore. We've got all kinds of other major global companies setting up shop here for the long term. So like, that's why it's just a no-brainer for me that long term, all this noise doesn't matter right now. And yeah, we talked about all the different things that are bringing people here. Like we've got 4 of the, you know, best schools in the country that people are coming from all over the place for. So anyway, I don't need to drill that home anymore. And listen, and sports and things you can't measure, like economists never talk about, that's like really important. Things like, you know, a lot of global, globally influential artists are coming from Toronto now. Like, you know, it's so weird that we're talking about people like Drake and The Weeknd and stuff, like when we're talking about a serious matter like this, but all of the successes of all the people that are like bred here and then show the rest of the world what it's all about, you know, all of that contributes to attention, and all of that attention contributes to, hey, what about Toronto as an option? Whereas Toronto wouldn't have been an option for somebody to come to and live here and make a life here before our profile just started improving across the board. So it does matter, and it's really hard to measure.
Yeah. And I meant to put healthcare instead of medicine here, but we get the point.
You
Okay,
get the point. Yeah.
let's go into more. I don't know if we want to drill into like what the actual science of like a recession is or a bubble, because we had a really good conversation with Ara for like 30 minutes the other day about what is a bubble and why Toronto is not in a bubble, even though there are. If you Google, I actually just did that for funsies. If you Google whether or not Toronto real estate is a bubble, yeah, there are, the Bank of Canada says we're not in a bubble, but then there are some economists who are saying we're like in a super deep, crazy bubble that's about to burst. I just want to talk about what do we foresee realistically tomorrow to look like for the Toronto market. Ara.
Raging dumpster fire. No, I'm just joking. First of all, I just want to make it very clear, prices don't just come down because they're high. Does everybody kind of agree with that statement? Like,
just because, yeah, people are saying, oh, people can't afford. So like, actually speak to maybe. I have people saying the average income is $40,000 and people just can't afford real estate. But that has been the case for many, many years, and people still were able to buy real estate.
So then I would just, like, Toronto is not the first big city in the world that has seen this type of activity. Like, okay, so that's also the case in a place like, okay, first of all, I would never say Toronto is New York, Toronto is Tokyo, Toronto is this, Toronto is that. I would never draw that comparison. All we can look at are other expensive cities and how they've reacted over time. Like, did people stop buying in cities like New York? Like, no. Like, yeah, I get it. The general population is going to be like, sorry, general, is that the right word?
The average
person. The average, I guess, the average person is going to be priced out of Toronto as a homeowner. Yes, Toronto is not going to be affordable for you tomorrow. Toronto is not going to be affordable for you tomorrow if it's not affordable for you today. That is a reality. There's nothing that any level of government can do unless they just physically gave you cash to buy the home that will help you buy and then make it affordable for other people to also buy. So if you are considering voting for a politician who
I'd like to interrupt here for a quick second. The government did already give us cash and people still couldn't afford Toronto. The government printed cash for the last years.
I was getting to that. And it was like, So what I'm saying there is like the with all any effort, what I was going to close with this was like any effort made to help make it easier for you to purchase is only going to further contribute to the prices increasing. So, you know, there's even a program with the Canadian government that allows them to help you purchase where they share in the equity of the home that you buy. And I think Mila has done things about the a webinar about this before with the shared equity. There are so many programs in place to help people buy, which is contributing to other markets that are much cheaper. Their property value is increasing, but like a market like Toronto is not just going to be affordable again tomorrow, no matter what happens. There can't be any restriction that's ever put in place here that's going to make stuff affordable for you. It's been tried over and over and over and over again. It's just not real. So
what it does is it dampens the demand, like slows people from buying. It has like no effect on prices or very minimal effect for a short period of time, and then it goes back up.
Yeah, like there's I don't know who SA is over here, but I always like somebody who agrees with me. So I'm going to say I like this person in the chat group there. So they're saying like Vancouver didn't get affected by these foreign taxes, but actually I'm going to slightly disagree and then agree with you, because the Vancouver did in the short term, because what Vancouver did when they brought down the foreign buyer tax, they didn't have any real exemptions for it, and it wasn't it wasn't something that started at a specific day. Even if you had a deal written and it didn't close, it was still affected. So they had no loopholes, no exemptions, no nothing, and then they started changing things after. Ontario learned from that and said, okay, we're going to impose this foreign buyer tax, but this is exempt, that's exempt, this is exempt, this is exempt. It had all these exemptions in place, and it didn't apply to deals that were written. It was applying to like deals that were written after a certain day. So it didn't affect us as much as it did them. But as we've known, Vancouver is the third most expensive city in the world, I believe, is a recent study just put out there. In the long term, none of that matters. So there are too many loopholes, which some of them were closed right now. So for example, a loophole that was closed in the foreign buyer tax previously, if you were coming here to work or if you're coming here for school, you didn't have to, you would pay the foreign buyer tax, but you got it back. They closed that loophole now. So there are, as you can imagine, a lot of people that were trying to invest here were using that loophole through their kids or whoever happened to be here to make those purchases to avoid that permanent tax. But the reason I believe, and a lot of other relatively intelligent people believe, that we're not in a bubble that will just kind of be here and then here, is because our real estate prices are expensive for a reason. It's because people are making lives here. They're not just investing here and walking away. So that's a big difference between, even the Vancouver market is quite volatile, because I think the world treated Vancouver like we treat Muskoka, like a recreational property center, where they had vacancy issues there because these were homes being bought to only be occupied for a short period of time during each year, even if that. Here, people are buying here because they're planting their roots here as their primary residence most of the time. We have, of course, there's going to be lots of, faceless corporations buying and, investing here. That's always happened, but not at a level where it's like, you're not competing against some foreign corporation, when you're bidding on a $1.5 million house in Leslieville and you think it became too expensive. You're bidding against another person like you. So that's the thing. A lot of people think that, there's some person on TikTok who went on and on and on about there's going to be nothing left for poor local Canadians. That's just, that kind of conversation borders on like extreme racism, and it kind of always has bothered me. Like, who do you think a foreign buyer is? What's a foreign buyer to you? Just somebody who's not from here? Then I'm sorry, then that's not that's not something that's ever going to change. Toronto is expensive because people want to be here for all the reasons Mila had in the slide before. And if you consider that somebody wanting to come here for school, to make a life here, to start a company here, to do whatever here as foreign equals bad, then you're just not a person that understands things. I don't want to talk to you. You don't, it's a very tough position to take. Toronto is expensive for that reason, unfortunately, and it's always going to be. So to kind of wrap up what I was just saying, like, bubbles are built on really no foundations. .com bubbles, tech companies are valued at crazy amounts that come tumbling down the next day. Netflix is full of these stories of all these tech companies that have done that. Toronto real estate is not that. Toronto real estate is expensive for a reason. It has reacted to market changes in the past by kind of pulling back, coming down a little bit, but then going on another run. And that's what we've always done. So it's more of like a little ripple than a bubble. And I just can't understand why anybody would legitimately think that we're in some sort of bubble that's just going to come crashing down at some point.
Yep, guys, I encourage you to throw out your whatever ideas or objections or questions that you have regarding this. This is the time to be asking these questions. Like, if there's something that we haven't covered that's still on your mind regarding, like, maybe there's something that you think may make the market, or something that you heard somewhere that is still not been addressed. This is the time to ask. This is the time to bring that up, because we have like a world-class panel of people in here who can help make sense of this information. Obviously, if you feel like you've learned a lot and have some better perspective, also let us know in the chat.
Who's this iPhone 12 person here saying that, in short, we're rich? I mean, listen, if you're going to be a buyer here in Toronto long term, you're going to have money. There's no way around that. So yeah.
I don't
know. In the chat, I don't know who iPhone 12 is.
Yeah, I don't know who that is.
Yeah.
Who is the future rental?
Who is
investment condo?
Who's the future? So where? You mean like what does the future look like for rental condos in Toronto? Is that what you mean there?
A topology. Like who's this market? Like, are they the retired people are doing downsizing, or
who are the people who are renting right now?
Who is renting the investment condos is what you're asking?
Yes.
That's a good question. So I guess it depends on where the condo is in general, but when you're talking about the urban communities like downtown and like the surrounding areas, let's say to like Etobicoke or just east of the beach, that kind of big area, there's a mix of people, right? So if you get right downtown, the majority of those renters are young professionals, but there are a lot of retirees in these downtown buildings as well that want to stay close to the urban center. So it's a mix, but the majority of the renters downtown are younger people that are just starting their professional careers, lots of roommate situations, lots of students going to Ryerson, U of T, George Brown, name the college, name the university. As you get into the communities outside of the core, which is where I really love to invest more than anywhere else, like the Leslieville or east of the beaches along Kingston Road, Roncesvalles, High Park, Mimico, like those communities that are less dense, but they still have a lot of rental product. Those communities have often older downsizers that might be cashing out of their homes that they've owned in the neighborhood for a number of years and then renting larger units in those areas. Like, there is a building, for example, in Leslieville called Biblio, a very small 35 unit building that the majority of the larger units at $1,500 per square foot were bought by these local downsizers. So a lot of these downsizers aren't necessarily renting. Some of them are, but the majority of these downsizers are selling their houses and buying these larger units in smaller buildings surrounding the core. But the majority of renters are young professionals at various stages in their lives. But also, a lot of investors have been buying larger condos because a lot of people have been priced out of the market that have good income and good jobs. So they have good cash flow every month, but they can't save the down payment to buy. And they've been demanding larger, higher quality condo rentals, 2-3 bedroom condo rentals in communities in the core and outside the core. So that's also who's occupying these rentals. The most popular pre-construction condo these days seems to be either the small 2 bedrooms or the larger 1+ dens that could accommodate a second bedroom in the den if you needed to. What's that, Mila?
No, I'm saying I'm agreeing.
Yeah, so those are the ones that people are looking for, whereas in the past, it was always like the smallest studio, which are still selling very well. But now that demand, very similar to those tiny studios, is now transferred into some larger units as well. So, there's renters across the board, but the majority of them are younger people.
Are we anticipating, like, what are we anticipating going forward right now in the nearest future, as far as like what the market's going to look like?
It's really hard to say. Like, I just, again, I don't really like to focus too much on the short term, like the day trading mentality, but I feel like there's buyers are a little bit scared right now. And I feel like sellers in some cases aren't getting the prices they had hoped for. But again, like, if I don't like to speak personally, but like Ryan, who's on, is Ryan still here? Is he there? Anyway, so like our team has been involved in offers over the past, couple of weeks that would go against a slowing market, right? So, last week, a $3.5 million house on Bedford downtown had 2 offers on it, right? So it sold for, you know, what it did. There was a, you know, a condo that Mila was offering on. How many on it? Had like 5 or 6 offers, whatever it was. Like, so it depends on where it is and what it is. So like, if you go back to December, January, February, we had historically low supply. There was like nothing on the market. So basically anything, no matter how bad it was, no matter what it was most likely getting a lot of attention and probably a number that was more than you would expect. Anything. Inventory has doubled since then. But when I say inventory has doubled, it's doubled from a place that was savagely low. So sure, inventory is up 40, 50% in some neighborhoods, but it's still 50 to 60% lower than what it was like pre-COVID and those months before COVID. So we're still in an extremely low supply environment right now. So the market should still be moving forward just fine, especially in our urban communities, with some like special properties still getting that big attention, big numbers, you know, good offers, multiple offers, lots of competition, while other ones who have tried to set themselves up for that multiple offer process have failed because they don't have as many buyers that are willing to compromise on the less desirable properties. So those ones, when you see a property listed for like, you know, let's say, you know, $899 and they hope to get 1.1, which is what would normally be happening, they don't sell on offer day. Those properties are being canceled and then relisted the next day for that higher price that they want and selling relatively close to that higher price, or just not being relisted at all. So seller strategies have to change in a market like this, where some properties are not going to sell as fast and predictably as other ones. But in the short-term future, there's no reason to believe that properties are going to be worth like 10, 20, 30% less in the markets that we trade in anyway. You know, there has never been a case in the past where we've had these unprecedented situations that have resulted in property values in the urban markets and surrounding areas. In this case, all the way up to like Kingston Road through Port Union, which is what I'm lumping into these neighborhoods because there's a lot of attention there too. There's no reason to believe things are going to be more affordable for you months, you know, down the road. Even if there is a decline 5, 6, 7% in prices, that would be a result of, you know, interest rates or some other economic activity that is probably affecting you personally as well. So you're not going to be able to take advantage of that kind of deal because sure, the property might be a little bit cheaper, but your interest rate for it will be higher. So essentially your cost to carry it is the same. So there's no real benefit, as long as you are a long-term thinker, to worry about what might happen in a month or two, or even in like a year. Because at the end of the day, when you're ready to retire, I'm 43 years old, I'll take more risks than a 70-year-old right now, obviously. But by the time I'm ready to retire, no matter what I buy today, it's going to be worth more when I'm ready to retire. And that's just how Toronto's performed, and will continue to perform, unless for some reason Toronto becomes undesirable in the world and nobody wants to be here. And I just don't see that as a realistic scenario. Do you? I don't know.
So with many industries going for Toronto for it to become undesirable, and if one of them goes to shit, there's like 7 others to prop it up. So
well, that's the big difference, right, between Toronto and like a place like Calgary, where Calgary in the past, which is changing now, by the way, Calgary is actually pretty decent, something to look at if you're an investor who's okay investing out of province. But you know, Calgary used to be just oil. If oil was affected, well, the entire place went nuts. But now it's becoming more of a financial hub, oil, and it's becoming a tech hub as well. So Calgary is actually doing some interesting things that I've been looking at lately. But anyway, we have actually another meeting starting in 6 minutes, so we have to go. But we can go over time though if there are any questions. So I'd love to answer questions if there are any. If not, we'll be sending this recording out to everybody today, tomorrow, not sure when, but if you're on this list, we'll be receiving the recording. If you signed up to this or just clicked the link through my Instagram story just now, we probably don't have your email address, so you can message that to Mila.
yeah,
and,
I figured out how to make people sign in their email address when they're joining the Zoom. So once
that's what I'm saying. You can't really do that there. So anyway, if there are any questions, now's the time. Anything?
I think people would have asked their questions by now if they had. If they do, we still have a couple of minutes, but if not, thank you guys so much. Please let us know if it was helpful for you. Great discussion, very informative. Thank you. Thanks, Chris. Natalie, thank you so much. It's great. That's excellent. Thank you so much. We're happy that this was helpful. That's the whole point of this, to give perspective to people. And we can take this conversation offline or behind this public look here. And you can ask questions anytime for myself or anybody on our team. You have our contact information on thespringteam.ca or Instagram, and we'll see you guys next time around. Thanks so much, Lee, for joining us as well.
Yeah, thanks, Lee.
And
Okay, guys,
yeah.
you gotta go.
Thanks,
Have a good
everyone.
one.